Hello, this is David and welcome to the Top 10 Strangest RPGs 1985 to 1995 edition. Most early RPGs were pretty straightforward following Dragon Quest's successful formula, but they quickly evolved and began pushing the envelope by experimenting with new ideas. Many RPGs have strange areas or a few wacky scenes, but we're not going to focus on those. Instead, we're going to look at games where the entire concept from beginning to end is pretty off the wall. Keep in mind, this is Strangest RPGs, not the best RPGs. Also, I'm sure that we're all aware of the Earthbound series, so that's no fun to cover. Let's look at some new games from the early years of video gaming. Here I'm going to be looking at games released between 1985 and 1995 using the original Japanese release date. Also, I'll not be ranking them on their strangeness because they're all rather strange and it's pretty subjective. So instead, I'm going to be looking at them in release order. Number 10. Sweet Home was released in 1989 in Japan only for the NES, but thankfully it was later translated into English. It's based upon the Japanese movie of the same name, and I'm actually glad that we got a fan translation for this game instead of an official localization, because back then Nintendo of America would have censored this into oblivion. Sweet Home tells the story of 5 filmmakers trapped in a dilapidated mansion where everything is out to slaughter them. Ghosts, traps, puzzles, and monsters are around every turn, and it's up to you to figure out how to escape intact. Death is permanent and very real here. With constant combat and no healing to speak of, it's kind of like death from 1,000 cuts. Sweet Home is commonly called the precursor to the survival horror genre, and it doesn't hold back. Number 9. Maniac Mansion was released in 1990 for the NES, and when I was a kid, I remember everyone talking about this game and how funny and cool it was. However, after renting it, I found that it wasn't really my cup of tea. This could be considered the American Sweet Home, except it's more of a point-and-click adventure game than a true RPG. However, I couldn't leave it out, it's just so weird. You control Dave and his 2 friends who set out to explore the mansion in order to rescue his girlfriend, only the mansion's occupied by a freak show of tentacles, murderous doctors, and monsters. Exploration is non-linear, and each character has their own special abilities to help you through the mansion. Also, the game boasts 5 different endings depending on the people that you pick and the choices that you make throughout the game. Do they even make games like these anymore? Number 8. Super Ninja Boy was released in 1991 for the SNES. This was a Tales game before Tales existed. The story's nothing to write home about, but the gameplay here is just so bizarre I had to include it. Everything looks very by the book when you start playing. You have an overworld, towns and dungeons, items to buy, and equipment too. But when you get into battle, it turns into something akin to Urban Champion, where Jack and Ryu kick-ass old-school style. In addition to the regular RPG fare, there are platforming sections to run and jump through, and when it comes time to fight a boss, it goes turn-based. How cool is that? Back in the day, there were actually a bunch of Super Ninja Boy games released here for the NES, Game Boy, and SNES, but like many RPGs of the early 90s, they didn't survive the trifecta of the transition to 3D, Nintendo pretty much abandoning RPGs on its consoles, and Sony's system overtaking the genre. Number 7. For the Frog, The Bell Tolls was released in 1992 in Japan for the Game Boy, but later translated into English, and if it looks familiar, that's because its engine was reused for Link's Awakening. However, the combat, or lack thereof, would be built from the ground up for Zelda because in this game, you just kinda scrap it out. You have no control over what your protagonist does, your stats just need to be higher than the monsters or else you'll lose. Though you can use items to help them out. The plot's your basic save the princess, but with many added quirks, such as transforming into a frog or snake as you traverse the overworld and dungeons to rescue her. The humor and translation is top-notch as well. Number 6. Great Greed was released in 1992 for the Game Boy, and while I always wished that Captain Planet would get its own RPG, I guess this is as close as I got. Great Greed is a childhood favorite of mine. Even back when I was 10, I always thought it was a very strange mashup of environmental consciousness coupled with an obsession for food. Just about everything in the game is named after food, from the nations to the people that you encounter to the enemies that you fight. So many people might think that the plot revolves around food too, but then many people would be wrong. The story's about a boy from the human world whisked away to the Green Kingdom to fight the evil Biohaz who's hell-bent on polluting the world. In order to stop him, you have to travel throughout the kingdom to win elections? Change laws? And find old records. Yeah, it's weird, but I guess that's how you fight against pollution in the real world too. Number 5. Paladins Quest was released in 1992 for the SNES, and while many games try in vain to elicit the alien planet concept, most of the time the environments still look decidedly Earth-like. Not here. You're definitely on the world of Lennis. The graphics are done in a strange pastel style, and nothing, not the trees, the people, the houses, or the enemies look like anything that I've seen done before or since, unless you count its equally strange sequel, Lennis 2. The strangeness extends to the battle system as well. Instead of just choosing to slash an enemy with your sword, you choose which body part that you wish to attack with. I mean, you can headbutt an enemy if you want to. Also, magic uses HP, not NP, and it has a saga-style leveling system which is pretty cool. The whole game, including the dungeons, are inspired. It never starts looking like a typical fantasy game, which I really do appreciate. It's so strange. It even pokes fun at itself. At one point, you'll enter a house only for the game to transform into a Dragon Warrior-esque church, complete with a priest. Number 4. Robo Chuck was released in 1994 for the SNES, and it's a game that's seeped in unadulterated wackiness. I mean, the Japanese title is slapstick, for God's sake. You play as the son of a famous inventor, and as such, you have robots do your fighting for you. Also, you pretty much invent just about everything that they equipped, as well as any special items that you have to use to get around, from X-ray glasses, to a transformation machine, to even your blimp. And who are you fighting against? The dumbest terrorist organization ever. I really like how it's set in modern times. Not many RPGs did that back then. Maybe just Earthbound on the SNES, but we're not talking about Earthbound here. Number 3. Wonder Project J was released in 1994 for the SNES in Japan only, and for the psych majors out there, it's kind of like Operate Conditioning the game, or maybe just one of the most adorable games ever made. You decide. To begin, you take on the role of a fairy, Tinker, whose job it is to raise a robotic boy, Pino, and teach him what it is to be human. In order to do this, you have to fill Pino's heart circuits by teaching him things like love of animals, love of competition, and love of nature. The best way to teach love is obviously to smack him around when he does something bad and praise him when he shows the appropriate behavior. Continue doing this and eventually Pino will get it. Also, you can fiddle around with his stats, increasing his kindness when he needs to love, or his aggressiveness when he needs to fight. The game isn't for everyone, but not all games are. Number 2. The Magical Land of Woz was released in 1995 for the SNES in Japan only, but later translated into English. This was one of the very first games I ever Let's Played because I loved it so much, but please, just don't watch the Let's Play because being as it was the first, it's laughably terrible. Anyway, back to the game. You get a choice of 3 characters living in Earth who are transported to the Land of Woz in order to save it from the Fear Rain. Sounds standard enough, except for the fact that Woz is certifiably crazy. You'll be going through towns made of cheese, flying a ladybug, recruiting one of the most useless characters ever to grace an RPG, and going through 5 very different magical realms filled with wacky characters, humorous dialogue, and just off-the-wall plot development. Woz even came with a comic book packed into the instruction manual, so you know the developers weren't going for a serious story. It really is too bad it never got a sequel. And finally, number 1, Metal Max Returns was released in 1995 for the SNES, and it's a remake of Metal Max for the NES. Both were released in Japan only, but later translated by Ion Genesis. How can you save the world after it's already been destroyed? People are barely scraping by salvaging what they can of the long-gone civilization. As such, being proficient with machinery is a boon, and your father wants you to follow in his footsteps by becoming a mechanic. However, you have other ideas. You want to become a monster hunter. This is kind of like Wild Arms meets Saga. Yeah, the game is an open-world adventure that you traverse with tanks that you build yourself. The game is packed with cute little details such as shopping from a vending machine, playing music on a jukebox, and hunting for monsters depicted on old Western-style wanted posters. You're never really exactly told where to go or what to do, you just explore, go to towns, reveal more of the hidden world map, talk to people, and stumble across mysteries of the past to ascertain why the world was destroyed in the first place. Well, that's it for the top 10 strangest RPGs from 1985 to 1995, but I do have some honorable mentions. Landstalker, Treasures of King Noel, God Medicine, and Illusion of Gaia. This will be followed by subsequent years, so I'd love to know what you think were the strangest RPGs that you've ever played and why. Let me know in the comments, and if you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and as always, have a good day.